What kind of working environment drives 11-seasoned professionals to walk away in just 5 years? And not just quietly, not just politely, but with whispered warnings, cryptic tweets, legal threats. And now, finally, one of them, Meredith Maines, the couple's most recent publicist, has broken her silence. And what she's revealed, it's not just shocking, it's disturbing. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. She didn't just leave her job, she escaped it. And on her way out, she left behind 3 words that lit up the internet, split public opinion in half, and sent the Sussex PR machine into red alert. They're pure evil. Now pause for a second. Because we've seen celebrity scandals. We've seen feuds. We've seen breakups, meltdowns, even publicists quitting under pressure. But this isn't just another walkout. This is the 11th publicist to step down from Team Sussex in less than 5 years. And Meredith was the only one who stayed long enough to see behind the mask. So the real question is this. What did she see that made her say that? And why now? Because just a year ago, Meredith was smiling for press photos. Handpicked as the grown-up who would turn things around for Harry and Meghan's image after the Spotify disaster, the South Park humiliation, and a growing sense that the public was done. Done with the drama. Done with the contradictions. Done with the Sussexes altogether. She had one job: clean up the narrative. Rebuild the brand. Instead, she walked away from it and left a trail of breadcrumbs so haunting, you can't help but wonder. Are the people who once claimed to be victims actually the villains of their own story? Let's talk about what really happened. Let's talk about Meredith Maines. Let's talk about why, after just 1 year, she quit the most high-profile PR job in the world and called her clients pure evil. And more importantly, let's talk about what she hasn't said yet. Because if what we've already heard is just the tip of the iceberg, what lies beneath might be darker than anyone imagined. Why this story matters now. Look, we get it. PR people quit all the time. But 11 in 5 years? That's not normal. That's not rotation. That's not career moves. That's not a better opportunity came up. That's a pattern. And here's the part no one wants to admit. These publicists weren't nobodies. They were the best of the best. Former executives from Sunshine Sachs. PR advisors with White House and Hollywood experience. People who had handled celebrities, politicians, CEOs, and still walked away saying this job was unmanageable. So the bigger story here isn't just that another publicist quit. It's that even the professionals are terrified to speak. Until now. Because Meredith Maines isn't just any publicist. She's a crisis comms expert with a reputation for walking into chaos and walking out with control. She's the person you call when your brand is on life support and you need a miracle. And even she couldn't survive a year inside the world of Meghan and Harry, which raises a terrifying possibility. Maybe it's not the brand that's broken. Maybe it's the people behind it. The power of silence, and why Meredith broke hers. For a year, Meredith said nothing. No leaks. No interviews. No tweets. No mysterious sources close to the matter. Nothing. Which is exactly how the Sussexes like it. Because in their world, loyalty is everything. Loyalty and silence. That's why every staffer signs airtight NDAs. Why even ex-employees are afraid to speak out. Why journalists who ask the wrong questions suddenly find themselves blacklisted. But Meredith? She didn't just walk away. She walked away with receipts. And now she's breaking her silence. Not for fame. Not for a book deal. Not for revenge. But because something happened behind those closed doors that even she couldn't unsee. Something she now believes the public deserves to know. And something that, if true, might finally explain why so many others ran from the exact same job without ever daring to explain why. The pure evil quote that shook the internet. Let's break down those 3 words. They're pure evil. That's not PR language. That's not branding. That's not strategy. That's personal. That's moral judgment. That's a line in the sand. And when Meredith allegedly said those words to a trusted contact after her resignation, fully aware they'd leak, she knew exactly what she was doing. She was lighting a fuse, one that would eventually reach the carefully curated media image of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex and blow it wide open. Because in the world of celebrity, evil isn't just a dramatic word. It's nuclear. Especially when it comes from the mouth of someone who used to defend you for a living. So why say it? Why risk everything? Why go out not with a whisper, but with a firestorm? That's what we're about to unpack. Setting the stage, the PR disaster that preceded Meredith's arrival. Before Meredith came in, things were already spiraling. Let's recap. The Spotify deal collapsed in flames, with company execs calling Harry and Meghan grifters behind closed doors. The Netflix series, meant to be their victory lap, became a punchline. Meghan's podcast, Archetypes, launched with fanfare and vanished with barely a ripple. And then came South Park, with a brutal satire so cutting, the couple's legal team reportedly considered action. By the time Meredith arrived, the Sussex brand was limping, damaged, divisive. She was brought in not just as a fixer, but as a savior. And for a while, she played the part. Silent in public, surgical behind the scenes. But even from the beginning, insiders say she was skeptical, not of the work, but of the narrative, because the stories didn't add up. The victimhood didn't match the behavior. And behind the scenes, the same people crying about being bullied were doing something that looked a whole lot like bullying. Which leads us to the real story. The one you won't hear in tabloids. The one Meghan and Harry don't want you to know. Why publicists keep quitting and why Meredith is different. Let's just say it. You don't go through 11 PR people in 5 years unless you're the problem. And yet, every time someone leaves the Sussex camp, it's the same line. They wanted to spend more time with family. It was a mutual decision. There was no bad blood. But behind the scenes? Different story. Whispers of gaslighting. Verbal abuse. Micromanagement so intense. One staffer said they were afraid to breathe wrong. Meredith saw it all. And the difference is, she didn't just watch it happen. She wrote it down. She recorded it. She tracked patterns. And what she found, by the end, was something she believed the world needed to hear. Not because she wanted to destroy her former clients, but because the truth, in her words, had been suffocated too long. So, what comes next? Over the next chapters, we're going to pull back the curtain. You'll hear what Meredith witnessed behind closed doors. You'll see why Meghan's obsession with narrative control pushed even her most loyal staff to the edge. You'll discover the secrets buried inside a hidden diary. The explosive emails accidentally forwarded to the wrong person. The anonymous interviews that weren't so anonymous after all. And the one off-the-record meeting that could unravel the entire Sussex media machine. But to understand the fallout, we have to start with the beginning. We have to go back to Meredith's first day on the job. And the warning she received before she ever stepped foot into Montecito. Because that warning? It wasn't from a journalist, or a troll, or a disgruntled ex-employee. It came from a former royal aide. And what they told her would echo in her mind until the very day she quit. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Before she even stepped foot inside Montecito, she was warned. You'll want to believe the best in them. Don't. That's how they get you. What would you do if your dream job came with a whisper of doom? What if, just as you were about to board a flight to California, someone, anonymous, urgent, told you to run the other way? That's exactly how Meredith Maines' journey with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle began. Not with a welcome, not with a strategy call, but with a warning. And not just any warning, but one that would haunt her every decision for the next 365 days. The first red flag came before day one. Let's rewind. It was late fall, just before the holidays, when Meredith accepted the call. After weeks of discreet interviews and vetting, she was offered the role. Chief Communications Officer for the Sussex's global brand. A powerhouse title. A career-defining moment. But within hours of the job going public, her inbox lit up. Not with congratulations, but with quiet concern. The first message was short. Don't trust the smiles. Watch how they treat the people who can't fight back. She brushed it off. Assumed it was from a royalist troll or someone jealous of her success. But then came another. If you value your reputation, walk away. You'll leave anyway. We all did. And then another. They'll charm you. Then they'll crush you. And finally, one that made her stomach sink. There's a reason you're number 11. But don't worry, no one lasts longer than a year. Meredith sat in silence, rereading that line. 11? She'd heard there was some turnover. A few PR shifts, maybe. But 11? Was that even possible? Still, she told herself what any ambitious professional would. It's just noise. I'm different. I can handle this. She hadn't even started the job, and the countdown to collapse had already begun. Day one in Montecito, smoke, and mirrors. When Meredith arrived at the Sussex compound, she expected warm smiles and strategic conversations. What she found was something else entirely. The security was tighter than she imagined, almost paranoid. Phones were collected at the door. Staff were strangely quiet, cordial, but guarded, as if they were playing roles in a script they couldn't rewrite. And Meghan? Perfect, poised, polished, effortlessly gracious. So gracious, in fact, it almost felt rehearsed. Meredith clocked it immediately. The compliments were too precise. The laughter landed too easily. The energy in the room was so controlled, it felt staged. But she ignored the tension. She chalked it up to nerves, or the nature of celebrity. After all, this was a couple whose every move was dissected globally. Maybe caution was just part of survival. Still, something felt off, as if everyone in the house was waiting for a cue. The rules were unspoken, but ruthlessly enforced. By week 2, Meredith started noticing the rules. Not in an employee handbook, not in an onboarding packet, but in whispers, in sudden silences, in glances exchanged between assistants when someone asked the wrong question. Rule number 1, don't speak unless spoken to. Rule number 2, don't ask where Harry is. Rule number 3, never, ever contradict Meghan, not even gently. Rule number 4, if she's rewriting the story, you're editing the truth, not defending the facts. Meredith thought she could handle this. She'd worked with politicians, with CEOs, with notoriously controlling artists. She could adapt. But then came the first incident. A staffer had forgotten to remove a name from an email thread. A journalist, blacklisted months ago, was accidentally CC'd. The fallout? Explosive. Not publicly. Not yet. But behind the scenes, Meghan screamed for nearly 45 minutes straight, according to someone who heard it through the kitchen walls. The staffer didn't show up the next day, and no one ever asked why. The strategic vulnerability sessions. One of Meredith's first tasks was helping shape the Sussexes' next big push, rebuilding their public image after a wave of backlash. This meant finding the right stories to highlight in interviews and social campaigns. Meredith expected brainstorming, research, media prep. Instead, she walked into what staff jokingly called therapy theater. In these closed-door sessions, Meghan would practice vulnerable anecdotes in front of staff, then ask how believable they sounded. Tears on cue, pauses rehearsed, empathy simulated. Meredith was stunned. Wasn't authenticity the whole point? She suggested loosening the structure, letting the moments be spontaneous. Meghan's smile vanished. People don't get us. We have to help them understand. It wasn't about sharing truth. It was about controlling the story, shaping it, selling it. And anyone who didn't get that didn't last long. Harry, the ghost in the house. What about Harry? Meredith barely saw him in those first few weeks. He wasn't absent, but he was adrift. He'd appear suddenly during meetings, sit silently, then interrupt with a strange, off-topic question, something about paparazzi drones or British surveillance. Staff would glance at each other, uncertain, and Meghan would quickly steer the conversation back. He's just tired. Ignore it. Meredith began to wonder. Was he even involved in any of the decisions? Or was he just there? Like a prop, a prince with no kingdom, and, increasingly, no voice. The first time Meredith said no. The real turning point came around month 3. Meghan wanted to issue a statement condemning a British tabloid for what she called character assassination. But the article in question? It was neutral, slightly gossipy, sure, but nothing defamatory. Meredith gently advised against responding. Engaging will amplify it. It'll look defensive. That's when it happened. The smile dropped. The room went cold. And Meghan leaned forward. Are you here to protect us, or to protect the media? Meredith stood her ground. She rephrased her point, softened the language, tried to de-escalate. But she could see it in Meghan's eyes. She'd already been marked. And from that moment on, the warmth disappeared. Behind the glamour, a world of isolation. As months passed, Meredith began documenting her experiences. Not in official memos, not in staff reports, but in a handwritten journal, kept locked in her personal safe. Why? Because she no longer trusted the walls. Emails vanished. Slack messages were mysteriously deleted. Conversations replayed in ways she knew she hadn't said. Something was wrong. Even calls with media contacts started sounding different, as if someone else was coaching them, or watching. And then came the strange moment that still gives her chills. She walked into her office and found Meghan scrolling through her private press list on her work laptop. No explanation, no apology, just a cool smile, just making sure we're aligned. Meredith didn't say a word, but that night, she changed all her passwords and started planning her exit. 1 year, one broken soul. By the time her contract neared its 1-year mark, Meredith was a shell of herself. Friends said she looked thinner, more exhausted, quieter. One even asked if she was sick. But she wasn't sick. She was spiritually depleted. Because when your job is to defend lies, and your integrity is all you've got, it wears you down. Every smiling photo op, every manipulated quote, every backroom decision to spin reality into something unrecognizable. It added up. Until finally, one morning in early autumn, Meredith walked into Meghan's private office and handed her resignation. The goodbye that wasn't a goodbye. You might think that would be the end of the story, that Meghan would accept her resignation, thank her for her service, and move on. You'd be wrong, because Meghan didn't take it well. And what happened after Meredith quit? That's where the story gets truly unhinged. Let's just say, Meghan doesn't believe in letting anyone walk away clean. She believes in loyalty, or consequences. And Meredith, by walking away, had just broken the unspoken vow of silence. But what came next would make every previous staff exit look like child's play. And it would drag Meredith into something far bigger than a simple resignation. Something darker, and something far more dangerous. They weren't fired. They fled. That's the phrase one former palace insider used when describing what's now being called the Sussex staff exodus. Think about that. Not left, not resigned, not even moved on. Fled, as in ran, escaped, got out before it was too late. And if you think that's exaggeration, you haven't heard what happened to the 10 publicists before Meredith Maines. Because if you thought her story was shocking, wait until you see the full pattern. 11 in 5 years. And every single one of them left with a trail of confusion, whispers, or damage control behind them. So ask yourself, what does it say when the people whose entire job is to make you look good can't even survive 12 months in your orbit? The myth of the mutual departure. Let's start with the language. Every time a new resignation made headlines, the Sussex camp used the same safe, sterile phrasing. We are grateful for their service. They've chosen to pursue other opportunities. We remain on good terms. But behind the scenes, it was carnage. One ex-staffer called the Sussex media operation a blender set to high speed. Everyone gets shredded eventually. Another described it as burnout culture dressed in designer empathy. And the public never saw it. Why? Because these weren't random assistants or junior interns. These were seasoned professionals, experts in image making, veterans of crisis management, people who knew how to keep secrets, even when they were hurting. But as the exits piled up, so did the tension. Because people began to ask, is this just bad luck or something far more toxic? The Hall of Ghosts. 10 names you were never meant to remember. Let's go back in time. Publicist number 1, Sarah Latham. A top comms director with political chops, served Hillary Clinton, worked in the Obama White House. Hired in 2019. Gone by 2020. Reason? Restructuring. Translation? She refused to spin personal attacks as misinformation after the South African tour backlash. Reportedly clashed with Meghan directly. Publicist number 2, James Holt, interim. Stepped in briefly after Latham. Loyal, but overwhelmed. Privately admitted he felt over his head. Demoted, then reassigned to Archwell. Publicist number 3, Catherine St. Laurent. A seasoned Gates Foundation executive. Hailed as a visionary leader. Lasted 11 months. Reason? She's transitioning into a senior advisory role. Translation? She tried to institute structure, and Meghan didn't like boundaries. Publicist number 4, Toya Holness. Stylish, smart, Harvard grad. Meghan loved her at first. Holness crafted Archwell's early tone, but vanished from internal meetings within 6 months. Reason? Focus shift. Translation? She pushed back on staging a paparazzi surprise appearance in New York. Publicists #5, #10. Some names were never made public. Some were freelancers brought on for specific campaigns. Some walked in and out without even signing full contracts. But the pattern? Always the same. The moment they asked questions, The moment they said, maybe we shouldn't say that. The moment they hinted at transparency, they were shut out, ghosted, restructured, and finally, replaced. Meredith's arrival, the exception or the target. When Meredith was hired, insiders believed she might finally break the cycle. She wasn't just competent, she was elite. A former executive at one of LA's most discreet PR firms, she had a track record of navigating scandal without becoming the story. And unlike some before her, she didn't chase fame. She operated in shadows. She protected reputations. So why did it go wrong? Two words: credibility and control. Meredith believed in facts. She believed that reputation had to be earned, not just rewritten. But Meghan? She believed in narrative control. If something was said online, it could be corrected. If a quote didn't land, it could be reworded. If an image didn't flatter, it could be buried. And when Meredith refused to play that game without limits, she became the next target. The unofficial rulebook: How to Lose a Publicist in 90 Days. Meredith later confided to a colleague that the pressure began within weeks. At first, it was subtle. Let's reframe that quote. Can you soften the timeline? Don't mention that name. She's dead to us now. Then it escalated. Why did you give them a chance to ask questions? That photo, delete it from our Dropbox. We need to start grooming the media before the Spotify story leaks. By month 3, it became clear. She wasn't hired to manage truth. She was hired to orchestrate illusion. And every publicist before her, they had seen it too. They just hadn't said it out loud. Not until now. The secret message board. Here's where it gets weirder. According to a well-placed source, there exists a private Slack-style board, never linked to Archwell, where ex-staffers from the Sussex camp discreetly compare notes. They call it the greenhouse. Why? Because that's what it felt like, one said. A glass box where everything looked perfect until you realized you were slowly suffocating. Inside the greenhouse, Meredith found posts from at least 5 other ex-PR staffers. Some joked about NDAs. Some shared coping strategies. One posted anonymously, "Every lie I spun for them took a piece of me." Another wrote, "I had to choose between my ethics and my rent. I chose rent. I still can't sleep." Meredith? She didn't post at first. She just watched, read, absorbed. And then, one night, after her third attempted resignation was mysteriously misplaced, she wrote one line. "I'm done spinning. Let them hang themselves with their own words." Meghan's reaction: control must be maintained. When word got out that Meredith had begun contacting journalists directly, outside of approved channels, Meghan reportedly lost it. One source described the confrontation as calm fury, smiling but cold, accusatory but quiet. "Is there a reason you're undermining the house we built?" Meghan allegedly asked. "I'm not undermining it," Meredith said. "I'm just not lying anymore." And that was it. The line was crossed. From that day forward, Meghan ceased all direct communication with her. Emails went unanswered. Meetings were canceled. Her calendar slowly emptied. She was being frozen out. But not before Meghan gave one final order: replace her. Quietly. But Meredith didn't go quietly. When her official resignation was finally accepted, it came with conditions. A non-disparagement clause. A media blackout clause. A 12-month cooling period. Meredith refused to sign. Instead, she offered her own conditions. She would walk away with her dignity. But if any false stories leaked about her performance or her loyalty, she reserved the right to correct the record publicly. It was a risky move, but Meghan blinked. Because here's the thing about Meredith. She had kept records. Emails, notes, dates, quotes. She hadn't leaked them, but she'd made it known that she could. And that changed the game. Because for the first time, the power wasn't with Meghan. It was with someone who had watched everything and survived. The PR industry reacts. Whispers, applause, and fear. After Meredith left, something changed. The whispers became louder. Media editors, who had once been terrified to challenge the Sussex narrative, started asking harder questions. PR insiders privately celebrated her stand. And others? They went silent. Because some had been approached about replacing Meredith and declined. Why? Because they'd seen the wreckage. And they knew that working for Harry and Meghan wasn't a career boost. It was a trap. So why do they keep hiring new publicists? Because without handlers, the Sussex machine crumbles. Without professionals smoothing the edges, the contradictions become obvious. The fake humility, the monetized victimhood, the curated photos meant to suggest authenticity while hiding the rot underneath. They need someone to sell the illusion, and they're running out of people willing to do it. So they dangle promises: freedom, fame, visibility, influence. But the smart ones? They're staying away, because now everyone knows. If you work for them, you won't just lose your job, you'll lose yourself. But Meredith wasn't just another casualty. She was the one who spoke up. And the moment she did, others started coming forward too. Because when the 11th publicist finally broke her silence, the dam cracked open, and what poured out would shake the image Meghan and Harry spent millions to control. But that image? It's only as strong as the secrets it hides. And what Meredith revealed next could tear it down for good. She didn't trust email. She didn't trust their phones. So she started writing it all down by hand. In a world where everything is digital, where every note is typed, every call is logged, and every message is traceable, Meredith Maines went old school. Because when you work in a house built on image, on secrecy, on tight-lipped control, you stop trusting the devices around you. Meredith didn't just feel watched. She knew she was. So she did what no one in PR does anymore. She picked up a pen and started writing the truth. In ink, in cursive, in a plain leather-bound notebook that she kept locked inside her travel briefcase. It began with little things: observations, odd reactions, passive-aggressive emails, conflicting orders from Meghan and Harry within the same hour. But what began as a coping mechanism turned into a living record of dysfunction. And what she documented, it paints a portrait of two people whose public message of peace and healing was violently at odds with how they treated everyone around them. The first entry, a smile with sharp edges. Day 1. Montecito. Meredith's handwriting was sharp, structured, like her. She wrote, "Meeting with Meghan. Perfect manners. Charming." But the moment I asked about timelines, her tone shifted. Smile stayed. Voice sharpened, like velvet over steel. It's a striking contrast from the media image Meghan had projected for years. The calm, thoughtful humanitarian. The soft-spoken victim of royal cruelty. But behind closed doors, Meredith's diary shows a different figure. One obsessed with narrative dominance, not clarity. One who didn't want to be understood. She wanted to be agreed with. And when Meredith gently pushed for honest strategy instead of performative storytelling, she stared at me like I'd betrayed her, Meredith wrote. Like I'd broken a silent rule I never agreed to. The incident tracker pages. By month 2, Meredith's diary had grown from simple reflections to something more structured, organized into categories. One section was labeled incidents. Each incident had a date, the person involved, a quote, the fallout. Some entries were small, staff being berated for minor mistakes. Others, downright chilling. February 18th, senior staffer corrected Meghan on a calendar conflict. Quiet dismissal 2 weeks later. No explanation. He was erased. March 6th, Meghan told me not to use the word strategy in meetings. It makes me sound manipulative, she said. She prefers intentions. April 22nd, heard Harry shouting behind closed doors. Something about being followed. Assistant came out shaking. May 3rd, Meghan dictated an Instagram caption. When I posted exactly what she said, she called it uninspired. Accused me of undermining her tone. This wasn't normal workplace tension. This was emotional warfare, dressed up in silk and PR gloss. And Meredith wasn't the only one feeling it. But she may have been the only one writing it all down. The codes and symbols. Meredith knew better than to spell everything out. Some pages were marked with just a time and a symbol, a lightning bolt, a cracked crown, or the initials MM circled in red. She developed her own shorthand. VB equals verbal barrage. SSM equals silent social manipulation. HD equals Harry disappeared. HT equals handlers took over. It sounds paranoid until you understand what she was up against. Because Meghan wasn't just controlling her image. She was, according to multiple entries, controlling the environment itself. Temperature in rooms, lighting for meetings, background music during strategy calls. Meredith once asked, half joking, if she had a sensory processing disorder. Meghan's reply? I have a vibration I need to maintain. The emotional toll. I'm starting to disappear. By month 6, Meredith's entries grew darker. The precise bullet points started to fade. Her handwriting loosened. Phrases became more personal, more frantic. I'm starting to disappear. No one says what they mean here. I don't know what's real anymore. My therapist told me I'm not paranoid, but I feel like I'm losing grip. At one point, she recounted a bizarre dream. Meghan was standing in a mirror, but it wasn't reflecting her face. It was my face. And I was the one being blamed for everything. Even dreams, it seems, had turned against her. This wasn't just a difficult job. This was a psychological trap, one that, slowly but surely, eroded her confidence, until the only clarity she had left was her pen. The recording decision, when memory wasn't enough. In one particularly vulnerable entry dated July 10th, Meredith wrote, "They say I'm remembering things wrong, that I misheard, that I read the room wrong. But I didn't. I know I didn't. I need proof." That's when she started recording, not on her work phone, but on a tiny, off-the-shelf voice recorder she picked up at a gas station on her way back from LA. She never recorded full meetings. She knew that would breach ethics. But private debriefs? One-on-one corrections? Harsh instructions whispered under breath. Those she kept. And at night, after everyone was asleep, she would transcribe quotes into her diary, next to the dates. Some were petty, others devastating. One example: if people knew who I really was, they'd worship me. But I have to pretend to be relatable, or they'll hate me. It's exhausting. Another, from Harry: I used to trust people. Now I just wait for them to leave. These weren't just diary entries. They were snapshots of unraveling personas. And Meredith was the only one brave, or broken, enough to capture them. The do not trust list. One of the most explosive sections came near the end of her journal. A page titled, "Do Not Trust," and beneath it, not enemies, not journalists, but names of current team members. People Meredith once considered allies. People who, according to her notes, had started spying on her, reporting her conversations, misquoting her, spinning her suggestions to sound insubordinate. One of them even forwarded her internal memo to Meghan, with a comment saying, "This feels dangerously honest." Honesty, it seemed, was the greatest sin in that house. Loyalty was measured not in truth, but in obedience. And Meredith had failed the test, because she couldn't keep lying. Not to the press, not to herself, not anymore. The final entry, "My Truth Insurance." The last page of the diary reads like a confession. It's dated the night before she officially resigned. "They'll try to make this look like my failure. They always do. But I've kept the truth. This journal is my insurance. If they smear me, I release it. If they lie, I leak the truth." She didn't want to go nuclear. But she knew what happened to people who crossed the Sussex firewall. They became villains. They became bitter ex-staffers. They became nothing. But not Meredith. Because she had written everything. Every contradiction. Every manipulation. Every silent scream trapped behind a designer's smile. And now, the world was starting to listen. What happened to the diary? That's the million-dollar question. According to sources close to Meredith, she's made copies. Scanned. Encrypted. Shared with 2 legal contacts and 1 journalist she trusts. So far, it hasn't been published in full. But parts? They've already been quoted in off-the-record interviews. And whispers say a major network has already expressed interest in adapting the material, either as a documentary or a limited series. If that happens, everything changes. Because up until now, Meghan and Harry have controlled the narrative. But Meredith? She controls the receipts. And unlike the couple she once worked for, she's not afraid of the truth. And just when she thought she'd regained her sanity, she discovered something else. Something far more disturbing. Something hidden in plain sight. A room in the house no one ever talked about. A room no staff was allowed to enter. But one day someone did. And what they saw shattered everything Meredith thought she knew. He kept saying, "They're watching me. They're still watching me." That was one of the first things Meredith heard Harry mutter, alone, disheveled, standing in the corner of his own home. No cameras. No rehearsed monologue. No Netflix crew. Just Prince Harry unraveling. And here's the part no one in the media wants to say out loud. While the world debated whether Meghan was manipulative, or whether the royal family was cruel, or whether Spotify was wrong to call them grifters, no one asked the real question. What was happening to Harry behind the scenes? Because when the doors closed and the media was gone, What remained was a man who looked like he was caught in a storm without shelter. And Meredith? She didn't just witness it. She documented it. Because by then, she had learned. The smiles were for show. The truth lived in whispers, cracks, late-night confessions. And Harry's breakdown wasn't a moment. It was a slow-motion collapse. The first signs. Disappearances and dead eyes. Harry was rarely present in meetings. That wasn't unusual. Many public figures deferred day-to-day strategy to their teams. But with Harry, it was different. When he did appear, he was off. He wouldn't look people in the eye. He fidgeted constantly. His speech was erratic. Some days crisp and charming, other days fragmented and paranoid. Meredith's diary noted. He walked into the room and didn't say a word. Sat down, stared at a spot on the wall. Meghan introduced him like a guest at his own table. Later, he would leave abruptly, offering no excuse. And when he did speak, it wasn't about plans, or press, or strategy. It was about the press, but not the usual kind. They're hacking again. They know we're planning something. They always know. We need to move the meeting. This room has ears. Meredith thought it was metaphor. Until one afternoon, he insisted the staff cover the windows with black garbage bags because the blinds were too thin. She didn't say a word. Because what could she say? This wasn't PR. This was something else entirely. Flashbacks and triggers, a prince haunted by his past. It's easy to forget that Harry's trauma didn't begin with Meghan. It began in Paris, with flashing lights and twisted metal. It began in silence, when the institution demanded he walk behind his mother's coffin without shedding a tear. That damage doesn't vanish just because you moved to California. And Meredith saw it. She wrote, "He jumps when someone knocks too loudly. He freezes when Meghan raises her voice. He's terrified of being cut off from what he never says." Harry's wounds weren't visible, but they bled into everything. His need to be liked, his obsession with vindication, his hostility toward anyone who reminded him of the firm, and worst of all, his growing dependence on Meghan to tell him how to feel. The power dynamic few dared acknowledge. From the outside, they looked like equals, modern, passionate, in it together. But inside the house, the imbalance was obvious. Meghan ran the calendar. Meghan chose the charities. Meghan approved the photos, the quotes, the narratives. Harry followed. There was a moment Meredith recounted in hushed tones to a friend. Never written, never recorded. Meghan had just rejected one of Harry's ideas for a podcast episode. He sulked quietly. Later, Meredith overheard him ask one of the assistants, "Do you think I'm stupid? Like, maybe I actually am." The assistant froze. Didn't answer. Because what do you say to a man who once had the world at his feet and now questions his own intelligence in his own home? The security episodes. As time passed, Harry's paranoia deepened. He would obsess over their security setup. He installed new cameras. He demanded encrypted messaging, even for family holiday cards. One day, he reportedly accused their own gardener of being planted by the British press. Meredith tried to reassure him. She even arranged a sweep of the property by a cybersecurity firm. But when they found nothing, Harry grew more agitated. "That just means they're better than we thought," he snapped. Meghan didn't correct him. She nodded, confirmed the suspicion, fed it, because in their world, fear was currency. And if the world was always against them, then they were always right, always justified, even when it hurt the people closest to them. The hidden room, Harry's safe space. Now, remember that room no one entered? The one staff whispered about but never acknowledged? It wasn't Meghan's. It was Harry's. Tucked away in the far wing of the Montecito compound, accessible only by biometric lock, it was Harry's sanctuary. Inside, old photos, military medals, a small British flag, folded, framed articles about Diana, some brutal, some reverent, and on one wall, a giant corkboard, covered in strings, clippings, tabs on royal relatives, headlines from the Daily Mail, the Times, the Guardian, post-its scribbled with notes like, "Camilla planting again? Was this Will's doing? Sun leak equals KP confirmed?" It was like a conspiracy bunker. Not violent, not dangerous, but deeply sad, because it wasn't filled with answers. It was filled with questions Harry was still chasing and may never find. Meredith called it the Grief Museum, and when one assistant accidentally entered while delivering documents, She was transferred to the London Archwell office 2 weeks later. Coincidence? Or something else? The moments of lucidity. Harry wasn't always broken. There were glimmers, moments of surprising clarity. Once, during a strategy call gone off track, he looked up and said, "You know what I miss? Silence. Before the noise. Before I needed to be a symbol for anything." He paused, looked around the room. Now even my silence gets quoted. Everyone laughed. But Meredith didn't. Because in that moment, she saw the real Harry. A man who didn't want power, who didn't want revenge, who just wanted to be, without being weaponized. But those moments were rare, and increasingly short-lived. Because whenever he did question the machine, Meghan would pull him back in, remind him of the mission, remind him of the war. And just like that, he'd disappear again. The breakdown Meredith couldn't unsee. The climax came one night after an argument. Details remain unclear, but what Meredith recounted, off the record, was chilling. Harry emerged from his private room, pale, sweating. He grabbed Meredith's arm, tight, eyes wild, and whispered, "They're going to take me. Don't let them take me." She tried to ask who, what he meant, but he was gone again, back into the dark hallway. Doors slammed, locked. The next morning, everything was normal. Meghan smiling, Harry polite, as if it never happened. But Meredith never forgot. Because in that moment, for the first time, she realized Harry wasn't just hurting. He was unwell, and no one was helping him. Not truly, not clinically, not objectively. Because no one could get close enough to tell the truth. And those who did, they were removed. The question that haunts the staff to this day, is Harry a victim or a participant? Was he dragged into this world of paranoia and performative trauma? Or did he build it, brick by brick, with Meghan by his side? The answer, Meredith realized, might be both. Because trauma doesn't excuse behavior, but it does explain why someone might cling to control, even as it destroys them. And Harry? He wasn't just clinging. He was drowning. And then came the recording. Meredith hadn't intended to capture it. She had left her recorder running after a strategy meeting. But what it picked up changed everything. Because Harry said something behind that closed door that no one, not even Meghan, knew he'd said. And if that recording ever got out, it wouldn't just damage his brand. It would burn the last bridge between Harry and the only family he had left. There was a room no staff entered. Until one did. At first, it was just a rumor. The Red Door, they called it. A private space on the third floor of the Montecito mansion, tucked behind a hallway with no cameras, no staff access, and, most bizarre of all, no Wi-Fi signal. And while most of the house buzzed with curated modern luxury, polished to Pinterest perfection, this one room was different. No one cleaned it. No one catered to it. Even the live-in housekeeper, who'd once worked for A-list celebrities in Bel Air, told Meredith softly, "We don't touch that room." Meredith assumed it was a meditation space, maybe a recording studio, some high-end luxury Meghan wanted to keep pristine and private, until she learned the truth. Because one day, a new assistant, freshly hired, eager to impress, walked in by mistake. And what they saw would be quietly erased from Meghan's employee records within 72 hours. The first clue. The calendar no one was allowed to sync. Let's rewind. About 6 months into Meredith's tenure, she noticed something strange. While most of the staff calendars were synced, Google Meet invites, shared PR timelines, media embargoes, there was one calendar Meghan used exclusively on her personal iPad. Not her phone, not her laptop, just the iPad. And it wasn't synced with anything else. It was filled with vague event titles. Study, vision board review. Alignment check, scripting room. Recalibrate. Tone correction session. It was odd. Meredith once tried to clarify what scripting room meant. Meghan's reply? "It's just where I center myself. No need to worry about it." But Meredith worried. Because each time scripting room appeared on the calendar, Meghan would go completely off-grid. No email replies. No calls answered. No footprints on Slack. And when she returned, her energy would shift. Sharper. More controlled. Like she'd rehearsed being herself again. The room that didn't match the floor plan. Later, Meredith would learn that the Montecito compound had been heavily remodeled before the Sussexes moved in. One of the changes? A new creative studio installed near the back wing. Only, no architectural permits were filed. No contractors listed. In fact, the room didn't even show up on internal staff maps. It was there physically, but administratively, it didn't exist. Why? Because Meghan wanted a space outside the system. A room unmonitored, unscheduled, unexplained. A space where, in her words, the real narrative is crafted. But crafted by who? And for what? The assistant who walked in. Her name was Hannah, not her real name. And she was 3 days into her new job. Tasked with dropping off a signed NDA contract for Meghan to review, she was told, explicitly, leave it in the study. But the assistant misheard. She thought they said the studio. And so, like any new hire trying not to screw up, she walked quietly down the corridor toward the studio. Found the red door. Knocked. No answer. Turned the knob. It was unlocked. She stepped inside and froze. The walls were covered in faces. Hundreds of them. Clippings. Printouts. Candid paparazzi shots. Red carpet photos. Instagram screenshots. Organized by theme. One wall. Royal family members. Camilla, Kate, Charles, William. Another. Celebrities who had either praised or criticized Meghan. Tyler Perry, Oprah, Beyoncé, Sharon Osbourne, Whoopi Goldberg. A third wall. Journalists. British tabloids. American reporters. Twitter influencers. YouTubers. All labeled. Some crossed out in red ink. Some circled with question marks. Others with sticky notes attached. Rescind offer? Strategic silence? Discredit? And in the center of it all, a large corkboard labeled Archetypes of Betrayal. The voice recordings. There was a desk. Sleek. Minimalist. MacBook open. But next to it, a small digital recorder. And headphones. Hannah didn't touch them, but the screen glowed with dozens of saved files. Labeled only with names. Kate 1.wave. Charles Private 2.iff. Piers DLYRECT.wave. Meredith vibecheck.mp3. That one stopped her cold. Vibe check. Why was Meghan recording conversations with her own staff? Was it legal? Was it paranoid? Was it something worse? And right there, in that moment, Hannah realized. She was being watched, even before she made her first mistake. The vision wall. Behind the desk stood the most striking part of the room. A massive corkboard labeled Vision and Mastery. This wasn't a vision board like you've seen in wellness books or TikTok influencers. This was strategic warfare disguised as affirmation. Photos of Meghan in magazine covers. Some real, some mocked up with fake headlines. Meghan named Global Icon of 2026. Netflix greenlights Woke Windsor series. Diana would be proud. Meghan wins Nobel Peace Prize. Below them, post-it notes with phrases. Control the question equals control the story. Tears equals reset button. Brand is not equal to truth. Brand equals belief. Be the victim and the hero. Let Harry be soft, you stay sharp. Meredith would later call it the brainstem of the entire Sussex brand. And no one knew it existed. Except the one assistant who made a wrong turn. And was gone by the end of the week. The spiritual mirror ritual. One chilling detail stood out to Hannah. And later to Meredith when she was told. In the center of the room, facing a full-length mirror, sat a single chair. Nothing around it. Just the chair. The mirror, and a small bronze plaque embedded in the floor that read, Become her. According to Hannah, there were lipstick marks on the mirror's frame. Faint smudges, like someone had leaned in close. Too close. It wasn't a mirror used to check makeup. It was a ritual object. And that chair? It wasn't for sitting. It was for transforming. But into what? Meredith's confrontation. When Meredith eventually heard what Hannah had seen, she didn't believe it at first. But then she remembered something strange. Weeks earlier, she had caught Meghan speaking to herself. Not just mumbling. Performing. Pacing in her private office. Repeating phrases. Trying them in different tones. No, I never said that. And if I did, it was taken out of context. We just wanted peace. But they never let us be happy. They made us choose between truth and silence. We chose light. Over and over. Almost hypnotic. When Meghan saw Meredith standing in the doorway, she didn't flinch. She smiled. Rehearsing for peace, she said. You should try it. It helps. And suddenly, the red room made perfect sense. This wasn't about centering herself. It was about sculpting herself. Curating her identity like a museum exhibit. Erasing flaws. Enhancing virtues. Crafting the Meghan she needed to be. Regardless of whether it was true. The final straw. Shortly after, Meredith confronted Meghan about the red room. She didn't accuse. She didn't reveal Hannah had told her. She simply asked, "Why is that space off limits to everyone?" Meghan's expression didn't change, but her voice did. Colder. Still. Like a winter lake hiding something beneath the ice. Because some truths don't belong to everyone. Meredith didn't push. But in her diary that night, she wrote, "I've seen narcissism before. But this is different. This is curated delusion. Manufactured empathy. Scripted sincerity. There is no real Meghan anymore. Just the performance." And just when Meredith thought she understood the full playbook, something happened she couldn't ignore. A message, forwarded by mistake. An internal email not meant for her eyes. One that proved Meghan had been spinning lies to the media and blaming staff when caught. And when Meredith read it, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply walked to her desk, opened her private Gmail, and scheduled a meeting with a journalist she trusted. Because what that email said would change everything. They rehearsed vulnerability like it was a stage show. The world remembers the interview. The floral chairs. The California sunshine. The haunting pauses and clipped responses. The moment Oprah leaned in and asked, "Were you silent, or were you silenced?" And Meghan Markle, poised, pained, whispered, "The latter." It was television gold. A cultural moment. An emotional nuke dropped on Buckingham Palace, and a seismic turning point in how the world saw the British monarchy. But for Meredith Maines, sitting behind the scenes, what aired that day wasn't courage. It was choreography, and it was the moment she realized she could no longer be a part of this. The rehearsals no one saw. Let's start with what the public never witnessed. In the 3 weeks leading up to the Oprah interview, Meghan and Harry went through what staff quietly referred to as story sculpting. It wasn't media prep. It wasn't talking points. It was performance design. They didn't just decide what to say. They decided how to say it. Which angle to tilt the head. Which phrases would trend. Which ones would spark headlines. Meredith was pulled into countless sessions. Some ran late into the night. And each time Meghan repeated the now infamous, "I just didn't want to be alive anymore" line, she would pause and ask, "Should I say alive? Or make it more poetic, like I didn't want to wake up again?" Meredith was stunned. Not because Meghan wanted to express something vulnerable, but because she was workshopping it. Like a screenplay, like a trailer. And when Meredith gently asked whether she was comfortable discussing that moment truthfully, Meghan didn't answer. She just smiled and said, "Truth is a lens, Meredith. I'm just adjusting the focus." Harry's hesitation and Meghan's response. Interestingly, Harry wasn't as eager. In the early planning stages, he hesitated to join the interview at all. Meredith's diary records. He said he didn't want to burn it all down. Said he still hoped things could be fixed one day. But that hope was short-lived, because Meghan insisted he be there. Not as her husband, but as her proof. She needed his face beside hers. She needed his nods, his pained expressions, his quiet anger. Harry would become the human echo of her experience, validating every line by just existing beside her. And so he agreed, grudgingly. But Meredith noticed something strange. Each time he asked to remove or change a statement, Meghan would gently override him. "This is our moment. We have to make it count." What that meant, Meredith would soon find out. The script that wasn't a script. The night before the interview, Meghan handed Meredith a document. Roughly 6 pages. It wasn't a transcript. It wasn't even a cheat sheet. It was something eerier, an emotional roadmap. Each topic, race, mental health, press intrusion, royal indifference, was listed with corresponding emotional objectives. Some were specific. Speak with restrained sadness. Let tears rise, but don't fall. Hold pause after mentioning title and Archie. Let Oprah lean in, then land the phrase. When Harry joins, switch tone, from victim to partner. Meredith stared at the document. This wasn't interview prep. It was scene direction. She wrote later that night. They're not telling their story. They're telling a story that's been tested, timed, and trimmed for maximum sympathy. This is PR theater at its most dangerous. The redacted topics. In a confidential exchange between Meghan's team and Oprah's producers, one Meredith was CC'd on by mistake. A list of off-limits topics was included. The list? Meghan's alleged bullying of royal staff. Her relationship with her father. The exact timeline of her mental health claims. Why several close friends had quietly distanced themselves. Spotify's brewing doubts about their production commitments, the Palace HR inquiry, and then the most surprising. Do not question whether Meghan exaggerated. Avoid suggesting interpretation bias. In other words, no doubt, no pushback. And Oprah agreed. Because this wasn't journalism. This was a moment. And everyone was in on it, except the viewers. The line that made Meredith's blood run cold. You know the one. When Oprah asked, "Were you afraid of what the royal family might do?" And Meghan replied, solemnly, "There were conversations about how dark the baby's skin might be." Meredith knew this line was coming. She'd seen it in the roadmap. But hearing it aloud, on camera, with no context and maximum weight, it hit differently. Because here's what Meredith knew. The actual conversation had been relayed secondhand, months later, by Harry. It was never said in a threatening tone. It wasn't tied to concern. It was part of a conversation about how the baby might resemble Meghan. And most importantly, Harry himself had told Meghan he didn't think it was meant maliciously. And yet, here it was. Weaponized. Framed. Hung like an accusation around the monarchy's neck, and never clarified. Meredith wrote, "That moment will stain the crown forever. And it might not even be true. Not like that. I helped stage a moment that millions will believe without question. And now, I can't sleep." Backlash versus benefit, a calculated risk. In the days after the interview, Archewell was flooded with attention. Inquiries, invitations, offers. Netflix doubled down. Spotify held their breath. Their social media exploded with support. But behind the scenes, it was chaos. Because for every supporter, there were 3 new enemies. Royal insiders enraged. Staffers traumatized. Family members devastated. And Meredith? Caught in the middle. Emails started coming in from reporters she'd known for years. Were you part of crafting this? Did Harry really mean what he said about being cut off? Is it true no one offered help for her mental health? Meredith didn't respond. She couldn't. Because inside, she was breaking. Every principle she'd built her career on, truth, ethics, nuance, had been compromised. She hadn't helped tell a story. She had helped sell one. The conversation that broke her. A week later, Meredith requested a private meeting with Meghan. She needed answers. She needed to know that this had meant something. That it hadn't just been strategy. That the pain she helped publicize was real. The meeting lasted 12 minutes. Meghan sat quietly as Meredith spoke. When she finished, Meghan leaned back and said, "People remember feelings, not facts. That's what matters. And people feel what I felt, even if they didn't live it." There it was. The final nail. Because that wasn't trauma. That wasn't healing. That was emotional engineering. And Meredith realized. She had been complicit in something she couldn't explain away. The private email that sparked it all. That night, Meredith was reviewing old drafts from the pre-interview planning sessions. She was cross-referencing notes, trying to make peace with what had aired. And that's when she found it. An old forwarded email from a team member who no longer worked there. Subject line. "Just in case, keep this safe." Inside. Proof that a particular quote attributed to Meghan during the Oprah interview had originally been written, not by Meghan herself, but by a paid image consultant. The quote, "I just wanted them to protect me the way they protected others." A beautiful line. Heartbreaking. Only, it wasn't hers. It was crafted, refined, purchased. And Meredith realized she'd helped present it to the world as a raw, emotional truth. She closed her laptop and cried, for the first time in months. The decision to walk away. By now, Meredith had already been slowly distancing herself. Less involvement in meetings. Less enthusiasm in messaging campaigns. But after the Oprah interview, and what she discovered after, there was no going back. She submitted her resignation that Friday. Quietly, privately. But Meghan didn't accept it. Not at first. Instead, she asked for a reset session. A one-on-one. Just the two of them. And what happened in that room would haunt Meredith for the rest of her life. Because in that final conversation, Meghan made her an offer. One so manipulative, so perfectly timed, that for a moment, just a moment, Meredith considered staying. But then she remembered the words on that vision wall. Let them think they're choosing. Then remind them who gave them the choice. And in that moment, Meredith stood up, walked out, and never looked back. But Meghan didn't let it go. Because no one walks away without cost. And behind the scenes, Moves were already being made to rewrite Meredith's exit, to make her look unstable, untrustworthy, disloyal. Only, there was one problem. Meredith hadn't just kept a diary. She'd kept something else. Emails. And one of those emails would soon leak. And when it did, it would reveal that Meghan